Hello, this is Laila Puntel. I'm an assistant professor in the Agronomy department at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And today I'm going to talk about what does digital farming look like. And just to begin with and give you a little bit of background about the program at the University of Nebraska, I just bring some illustrations and pictures to kind of show you the activities in research and extension that we do in the program of Precision Ag as well as Digital Agriculture. So a lot of what we do is about technology, from collecting data to helping growers to implement that data to make better decisions, train students, innovate with things like robotics, and try to bridge disciplines together. So a lot of the projects that we do are sometimes multidisciplinary, crossing over agronomy, engineering, the stats, computer science, and other departments. So there's a lot of varieties of activities, and farmers are always part of this process in which we try to create innovations and results that could be then translated into action and practical decisions. So let's start thinking about what kind of management decisions a grower does during the growing season. Well, growers to begin with are managers of their farms. And so you can think about farmers, growers doing decisions related to fertility or fertilizer, how much to apply. But there is actually a lot of equipment associated with it. There's a lot of timing and other factors that need to be decided in order to put that fertilizer down in the ground. So the picture on the middle, you can see an injection of nitrogen into the soil during the fall. And so farmers might tend to look for the weather patterns, look for precipitations, look for the temperatures during the fall and see if those conditions are the best for applying that fertilizer. And then on the bottom panel, you can see a sprayer for doing season application of nitrogen. And so some farmers might wondering, did I lose nitrogen? Do I need more nitrogen? How much to apply and when to apply it? So as you can start seeing, there's a lot of decisions that need to happen during the growing season. But this is just one aspect, right? We have decisions even at planting. When to plant, how deep to put that seed. Then during the season, decisions about when to irrigate, when to start irrigating, and even when to harvest. Is my crop ready? And then after that, there's a lot of decisions that also need to happen with that crop. And even perhaps some context in economics, social, or perhaps other contexts going on. Growers might tend to switch or move from one crop to the other, following a rotation or perhaps following an activity. So even thinking about what pastures or what mix of grains to plant in the ground to feed the cattle, for example. And so as you can see, there is a lot of complexity associated with all the management decisions that happen during the growing season. But this is not all. Not all ends here in terms of practical management decisions. There's other factors that farmers might or may not control during the growing season. So you could imagine that in an ideal world, what we would like to see is a field that looks like this, right? When we see one plant next to the other, homogeneous, same height, and we can pretend or imagine that the soil beneath these plants are exactly the same across the landscape. Well, let me tell you that this is not the real world for many situations. Farms sometimes look like this, where we can have different soils and different landscape positions across or between fields of a farm. And so the low and laying areas or the high hills will behave different and they will grow a different crop. So how do we account for all those factors that are affecting how the crop will grow? And let's start thinking how all the nutrients will differ in their requirement depending on how the crop grows. So here's the concept of what we call spatial variability. So soils and landscape positions affect how the crop grows within or between fields. But this is also not the end of the story. There is another factor that adds more complexity into the system, and that's the weather. And I'm going to put you the example of precipitations just to bring one of the factors. And so this graph is showing the trends of weather and how the crop might react to it depending on what kind of weather year I am at. So at the bottom, the purple line, you can see below average precipitation during the growing season. And the crops react pretty poorly. You see in this picture like curly leaves, giving the example of an underperforming crop. And then we have situations that are above the average, where crops produce much more biomass and they're healthy and they're happier. Now, again, all these precipitation factors will affect how much nutrients do I need, how much water extra do I need during the growing season. So all the management decisions that we cover at the beginning, all those decisions are usually modified depending on the weather trends that we have. But the good news is that today, and I will put you an example of drone images or satellite images. Today we have a lot of technology that is allowing researchers, professionals, growers, farmers to interpret and monitor how all these factors, the spatial component, meaning how soils vary across the field, as well as weather patterns, change year to year and field to field. So in this example, you can see how we are seeing areas within the field that are performing different. And so we can start adjusting our management decisions depending on what we see within the field. And so I'm going to put you an example of really what's the transition that has been going on in management decisions in agriculture. And I'm going to put the example of nitrogen recommendation methods. Back in the 90s, or even before that, growers tended to make nitrogen decisions based on one single factor. And that method is popularly called yield goal method. So tell me your yield and I will tell you how much nitrogen to put on. Now, if you see the progression into what we call the digital agriculture era, tools and available data are getting more popular and more abundant, and open source started to appear, and a lot of the products like from NASA started to provide continuous monitoring of farmer fields, and a lot of that data now could be utilized to make better management decisions. And so later in the 2000s, we have more commercial models that utilize a lot of the processes that we know about, how crop growth and things that happen in the soil, and I start utilizing a lot of these data that is becoming available into nitrogen management decisions. So this is the transformation, this is the direction that we are taking, or that agriculture is taking. And along with the University of Nebraska and the extension efforts, we're guiding growers to try to adopt these technologies and have a better training and a better experience with it, so we can make a more efficient management of agriculture inputs. Now, what happened with adoption though? This technology is fantastic, has been available for years now. So the trends are the ones that I'm showing you in this graph. This is a percent of increase in the adoption of some technologies. For example, one of the most popular ones is grid soil sampling, yield monitoring. But even though these technologies are very popular, only 20% of the crop acreage, for example, for corn, is managed using precision agriculture in the United States. And so that's telling me that some of this information is being underutilized. And perhaps a lot of growers seem to have you monitor data, but the potential of the data that is in that data layer is not being explored to the maximum. And so drone images the same. We started monitoring and adopting a lot the technology per se, but then that doesn't necessarily mean that that technology or data layer is being utilized to make management decisions and be more precise about those inputs in agriculture systems. And so at the University of Nebraska, we have been working a lot with technologies that are a little bit more complex, like the example of the nitrogen timeline. So we are trying to not only do research to innovate and to understand better about the performance of some of those tools, but also to promote adoption. So I'm going to put you the example of crop simulation models. So in these 3 panels, I'm kind of synthesizing what a crop model does. And so it really uses inputs like soil, weather, and the input from a management that coming from the grower or all the historical records. And that goes into a software or a computer program that really is simulating how the crop growth and what other mechanisms happen in the soil and the interaction with weather management in order to simulate what are the needs of that crop and as well as what's going on in the soil. Then there's a lot of internal processes, I will call it for now the black box, where there's a lot of science condensing equations, mathematical equations that simulate that growth of a crop every day using daily data. The output that is encoded in a lot of these software technologies is a report, something that gives you a notification, perhaps an irrigation notification or a nitrogen notification saying you need to apply this much due to these conditions in the soil. And so you can think about raining more, having more crop potential, more crop growth, and then having the need of more nitrogen. So crop simulation models, as you can see here, require a lot of data and a lot of input. And so at the University of Nebraska, we are trying to connect with growers through the extension program in order to give growers the opportunity to test this technology in their fields and then promote adoption by simplifying the process on how to set this technology. So let's go over one example, and I just want to tell you that we're testing all this technology across the entire state, but I'm bringing one example of what's the impact that we're creating in these growers. So this is a grower in Nebraska. He's a corn soybean producer, and he always has been doing variable rate, but the way in which he is setting up that variable rate application is just more simplified than the way that a crop model can actually simulate that nitrogen to be applied. And so what we did is to have a side-by-side comparison in his field of his management, his traditional variable rate management, against a crop simulated nitrogen management. And so you can think that perhaps for some growers would be crop models, for some others would be other technology that it would be more feasible to adopt long term. In this case, this grower was already used to do variable rate, and so changing or making more precise the way that he's deciding the variable rate made more sense in this case. But let's take a look about what happened with this particular field in 2021. So at the top, we're showing the nitrogen application, and at the bottom, the yield. And so what you can see over here, the first message and the thing that we are repeatedly seeing on farmers' data is that we include a lot of inputs, and when we account a lot of what's going on during the growing season, we are being more precise with the amount of nitrogen that we are utilizing. So at the top panel, you can see that on average, this doesn't include particular cases within the field, we save 16 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And then at the bottom, we find out that there were no significant difference between yield. And this is across all the repetitions that we left and randomization and everything to make sure that this testing is robust. And so we have been replicating these type of trials across Nebraska and always having these insights that the more data and the more data in season we have into the management decisions, the more chances of being precise and being more efficient we have. Now, as we saw in the previous slides, models and other technologies require a lot of inputs, and we acknowledge the fact that adoption is being limited because of all the information that perhaps needs to process. And so we know that we have bottlenecks that we need to continue working on. In particular, simplifying the ingestion of a lot of this data into the models, or perhaps removing the need of having all these inputs coming from the grower or the agronomist or the crop consultant. And so what is the solution here? Well, today, thanks to NASA and some other organizations, we have access to a lot of products that are connected somehow with these processes or these plant growth processes. And so our vision here is that as these products start being more processed and easy to ingest in a lot of these tools or models for management decisions, the uncertainty as well as the adoption will get much, much better. So what I'm showing you here is as we ingest all this data during the growing season, we also have an impact in the uncertainty of the prediction. And so perhaps you can think about estimations of biomass, estimation of moisture in the soil that will contribute to have better yield estimation or a nitrogen use or a water use. And all those can be translated in real time to the grower. Where do we see the advances or where do we see the need is to have that information or products coming from, for example, from NASA and their satellites, to have them in times that are critical for farmers to make decisions. And so we really truly think that partnerships with entities that are providing these advanced inputs with institutions like the University of Nebraska doing extension and research on how to practically apply all this data and merge it with the process of adoption is the future of the digital agriculture. And so to finish and wrap up my presentation, I just want to end up with what the vision we have in terms of digital agriculture. So we touch base on nitrogen, but with this illustration, I just want to show you that we need to imagine an agriculture where a lot of the management decisions across the entire operation are being data driven, where we have not only the corn or the nitrogen being managed in that way, but then we have animal production. We have data-driven decisions based on how we circulate with our machinery across the farm. How are we planning our activities depending on our precipitation monitoring? And again, being governed by a lot of these satellite images and aerial images that are coming into play to give us really relevant inputs that are within the system to improve that efficiency in the prediction and reduce the uncertainty that we have. So with that, I want to leave you my contact information. I encourage you that if you have any question of some of the topics that we covered in this presentation, or if you want to get in touch and learn more about how we are testing these technologies with growers, reach out to my email. And you can also find me in the Twitter media or at the University of Nebraska website.